Hello, I'm Jeremy, and today I'm going to take a look at a game only published in German at the moment by the name of Die Quacksalber von Quedlinburg. It translates to something like the Quack Doctors or the Quack Potions of Quedlinburg, which is a town in Germany, as I understand it. And in this game, which is a really unique deck building, or I guess a bag building game similar to Orleans, but it's definitely a faster playing game than that. It's a bag building game where you are going to be playing essentially a quack doctor who's going to be trying to brew potions to sell at a fair, and the player who has the most luck doing that over the course of 9 rounds is going to be the winner. The game plays from 2 to 4 players. The box says about 45 minutes. Maybe your first game might take more like an hour, but I could see it getting into the 45-minute range as you become familiar with the rules. The box also says 10 and up. That seems entirely reasonable. Again, there is a language dependence issue with this, where some of the texts and the cards have German text on them, so you will need a translation. I did create one. I am proofreading it at the moment. I'll publish it probably by the time this video is up on Board Game Geek. But just be aware there are language dependent components that you'll need a crib sheet for, or some paste ups. In any case, let me show you how this very unique family game plays, and I'll come back and let you know what I think about it. So I've set up most of the components here for Quacksalber, and just for a single player. The game plays from 2 to 4 players. So there is here this round tracker or score track also, so you can see the game is played over 9 rounds, after which whoever has the most points is going to win, and you'll keep points using these markers here with this score track. It also helpfully shows you the scoring phase for each game, which you'll be going through each of these steps pictured here in order every round. Then you're also going to set out a market, which is essentially these spell books here, that will change from game to game. Each one of these tiles, which indicates a color of these chips, which are going to be representing ingredients for your potions, is essentially has 4 options. There's 4 variants for each of these chips. Each of these has a two-sided recipe book. So in this game, these will let you draw extra tiles from your bag, but then the next time that will affect what happens if you make your cauldron explode. But it will change from game to game, so you can mix and match these as if it were a deck building game. Then you'll also set out a number of chips for players to buy. During each round, you'll have an opportunity to buy chips, some of these extra rubies, one of these cards, a die, and then most importantly, each player is going to get one of these cauldrons where they're going to actually brew their potions. I should note that I have it set up here on the advanced side, which includes this track at the bottom. The basic side, which I've actually never played with, does not include that track. It just has some helpful information in it. And I should point out here that among this helpful information, it tells you which chips should start in your bag. So you can see you have a lot of white chips in your bag and then a few other chips. And that'll be important in a moment. So the way that this game works, the first thing that you do each round is you flip over the top card from this deck, and then you'll read the effect. And this is generally, and these are in German, but this will generally affect all players for the round. Some players might get a bonus. They're generally not a bad thing. It just might be a good thing that doesn't happen to affect you. So this one is if you don't explode your cauldron, you have the option to draw 5 chips and place one of those chips, and that'll make more sense in a moment, but let me just show you how the round works out. So what's going to happen is, once you've revealed that, you are going to then start drawing chips one at a time from your bag. So each player, like I said, they'll start with the same starter chips in their bag, and what they'll do is they'll draw these chips out one at a time and place them in their cauldrons, starting at this drop, spiraling outward. You can see that this cauldron has number spaces on it. So if you drew this one chip, this one white chip, you would simply put it on the next available space in the cauldron. Then you would just choose if you want to stop or continue to draw chips. So let's say you drew again, you get another one, it just goes on the next space. You draw again, you get a 1. Draw again, you get a 3. So when you draw a number that's not a 1, you skip that to that many spaces. So the 3 goes 3 spaces past the next available space. So you go 1, 2, 3 and place it there. So then you could draw again. We have a green 1 there, and then maybe just draw one more. And then this player might choose to stop. And the reason why they might choose to stop is it's on the basic side. It shows you that if ever your white total of all of your white chips is greater than 7, you'll bust. And I'll explain what busting does to you in a minute. And that will mean you have to, if you bust, you have to stop drawing. But otherwise, you could continue to keep drawing until you bust or until you choose to stop. You also do get at the start of the game this potion, which whenever you draw a chip, you could choose to put that back in your bag, but you have to flip that over, and you'll have to pay rubies, which I'll explain in a moment, to flip that back. So essentially, that is a way that you could throw a chip back in the bag. Although, if the chip that you drew causes you to bust, you can't use that. You can only use that earlier in the round before you bust. So this player, did not bust. We can see they have 3, 4, 5, 6, so it's less than 8, which would be the bust number for the player. So they are fine. They chose to stop, and then every other player would, keep drawing until they chose to stop. Then you would move on to the scoring phase. So again, what you would do then is look at these things in order. So for the purposes of scoring, this player has chips going around here, and the last chip that they placed was on this space, on this space here, on this 8 space. So the next available chip that they have of it, or the next available space that they have in their cauldron is this one here. And you can see it has a 9 on it, a 1 on it, and a picture of a ruby on it. And not all those spaces have pictures of the rubies. And these numbers, the 9 and the 1, those will get increasingly large as you spiral out. As you can see here, you could get all the way up, to 35 and 15, right? But that would obviously require you to pull a lot of chips from your bag. So this player has the 9 and the 1. So what you first do is you ask among the players who haven't busted. If you're busted, you're not eligible for this bonus. Who reached the highest number, the highest space along this cauldron? Whoever did that gets to roll this die, which just gives them an instant bonus. It could be a point, it could be a ruby, it could be another pumpkin chip for their bag, which is just a value 1 chip. It could be 2 points, and so on. Or it could be one of these, and I should explain this now. This is a tier or a drop advancement. So the drop advancement works like this. So in the advanced game, what you could do is you could move the drop 1 space along the bottom here, taking the reward that it shows. So a ruby, a point, an extra chip for your bag, and so on. And that will get better over the course of the game. Or you can move this one up. So if you move this one to here, for example, it wouldn't affect you this round, but next round you would start 1 space up further on your spiral, which will improve your score for the round. So, whoever got the highest advancement among their things gets to roll this. They rolled a 1, they would get 1 point on the score track. Then what you'll do is you'll score these 3 special kinds of chips: the black chips, the green chips, and the purple chips. And I'll explain what those do in a minute, but at the start of the game, this player only had a green chip in their bag, and the green chips, and forgive the German on here, but what happens with the green chips is, with this particular setup, again, all of these have multiple setups, so the green chip's function will vary from game to game, but in this setup, if the green chip is in one of the last 2 positions, so essentially it's one of the last 2 chips that you've drawn in that round, you get a ruby for it. So for each green chip in the last 2 positions, so you could get up to 2 if you had the last 2 chips as green. Here there's just 1 in the last 2, so they would get a ruby. Then if the next available space has a ruby pictured on it, which it does here, you can see that it has a picture of a ruby, they would also get a ruby for that. And then what will happen, and this is where busting really matters, again, on the next available space, this player had these 2 numbers, the 1 and the 9. What's going to happen, for the players who don't bust, they'll get to take the number in brown in victory points, and then they'll have the number in green as currency that they could spend during that round to acquire more chips. If you bust, you could only take either the victory points or buy more chips. So this player who didn't bust could both get a victory point and buy. Players who busted have to pick one or the other. So this player would get a victory point for that, and then they would have the option to buy new chips. So at the start of the game, they could buy these 5 colors of chips, and each one of these boards here shows you what the cost in that currency is for a chip. So they could buy a level 2 green chip, which again, when you place a level 2, you get to skip a space, essentially, on your spiral, so that's wonderful. Or they could buy 2 different chips, but the catch is they have to be 2 different colors. So with 9, they could, for example, buy one of these red chips for 6 and one of these orange chips for 3, for a total of 9. Or what have you. So each player will be able to do that in turn order. Usually at the start of the game you could pretty much do this simultaneously, but there are a limited number of each colored chip, so if those start running out, it defaults to turn order to see who gets to buy first. Once all players have bought their chips, then there's an option to spend 2 rubies as many times as you want to do either of the following 2 things. First of all, if you use this potion and it's on the exhausted side, you can spend 2 rubies to flip it back over, so you'll be able to use it again in the next rounds. Second thing is that you can spend 2 rubies to do a drop advancement, which again will improve your starting position among this spiral, or get you just a one-time bonus among this bottom track down here. So those are the 2 ways that you're going to be able to use the rubies. Then that would basically be the end of the round. So what you would do then is you would reveal the next card. This one here is... This is just simply every player gets to move their drop forward 1 space. So like I said, these are generally going to be positive things for the players. So each player would get to choose that. Then there's going to be a little catch-up mechanism. So essentially, let's say this player's at 5 points and the other player didn't score any points last round. Maybe they busted. What you'll do is on this score track, and let me pick this up so I could better show you, there are these little rats depicted. So if this player was at 5 and the other was at 0, you count the number of rats that are between the player in first and your marker. So if the player was at 0, they'd have 1, 2 rat tails between their marker and the player at 5. So for that, so again, actually you would clear these off, put these back in your bag along with any new chips that you would buy, and then again, this player, maybe they took that as their free drop advancement. Then, like I said, they had 2 rat tails, so what they would get to do is put this rat marker 2 spaces up versus their normal starting space teardrop. Just for this round now, as a bit of a catch-up, they're going to start further along on this track than the player who has the most points. So that's going to be applied every single round as well. So you're going to be doing that, like I said, for 9 rounds, and each round earning some points, acquiring some new chips. Whoever has the most points at the end of the 9 rounds is going to be the winner. There are some changes that happen over the course of the 9 rounds. So, for example, in round 2, yellow chips will become available. They'll have different effects depending on which set of these spell books you use. Round 3, the purple ones come out. In round 6, you have to add another white chip back into your bag because as you acquire more and more chips, the number of white chips in your bag is going to get diluted. And then finally, in the last round, you have the option to just pull out your chips one at a time, so you could see if other players want to choose to stop or keep going. And then, since buying chips doesn't make sense in the final round, you have the option to turn in, for every 5 money, I guess, that you would have on the track to buy chips, you could instead buy a victory point. And also you have the option to turn in excess rubies for a point each as well. So that's the basic round structure of the game. So it's pretty simple. You're just going to keep drawing chips, trying to get as far along this track as you can, hoping that you don't bust. But the real wrinkle of the game definitely comes in with these special chip powers. So let me just take a moment or two to explain what some of those do to give you a better idea of how this game functions in practice. So each game, these 2 are always going to be in effect, these 2 colors. So these aren't going to change, except this one changed a little bit based on player count. But these orange ones always just have no effect, but they're the cheapest ones to buy. They won't ever hurt you. You could put them out along your track. They help you advance your track, but they don't have any special ability inherent to themselves. The black ones are interesting. So at the end of the round, in this scoring phase here, you're going to look at how many black markers you have on your cauldron versus other players. If you're beating one of your neighbors, you're going to get a drop advancement. If you're beating both the person on your left and the person on your right, you'll get a drop advancement plus a ruby. So it's a little bit of a majority scoring for those, and those will be present in every game. Then these could, like I said, each one of these colors, each one of these 5 colors has 4 different variants, so you could really mix and match how this game is going to play. But I'll just explain what these are like for this particular game to give you a sense of how this works. So the blue ones, these are really powerful. When you pull a blue if it's a 1, you get to draw the next chip from your bag and choose whether or not you want to place it. So if it's a white chip, you might choose not to place it. But if you, for example, have a blue 4, not only does it move 4 spaces along your cauldron, but you get to draw the next 4 chips and choose one of them if you want to place it. Otherwise, just throw them all back in your bag. So this is a good way to mitigate the luck in the game. It's a really powerful chip. These red ones, they work in tandem. You can see here in the picture with the orange ones. So at the time that you pull out a red chip, you look and see how many of the pumpkin chips that you've already placed on your cauldron. And if there's 1 or 2 out there, you add 1 to the value of the red chip. If there's 3 or more, you add 2 to the value of the red chip, which really could help you scream along on the cauldron. But the catch is, of course, that you have to pull your orange chips before you start pulling your red chips, which is just, you know, a bit of luck. The green ones I kind of explained already. Here you're just going to look at the last 2 chips that you've pulled in the round, regardless of whether or not you busted. And if the green chips are in the last 2 positions, they will each score you a ruby. And then like these yellow and purple ones, they come out, like I said, in rounds 2 and 3 respectively. The yellow ones, what they let you do is at the time you're going to place a yellow chip, you look if the previous chip that you placed is a white chip. If that's the case, you get to take that white chip and throw it back in your bag, which will reduce your risk of exploding. You know, it'll reduce that number of white chips that you have out on your board. So that could be really handy, but you have to, again, get lucky that you're pulling those immediately after you've just pulled a white chip. And the purple, at the end of the round, in the scoring phase here, you'll look at how many purple chips are present on your board, and you'll get a bonus of points and a ruby, or points and a drop advancement, based on how many are present on your player board. Again, unlike the black ones, these don't, it doesn't matter what other players have, you're just looking at your own personal board. So those are basically the simplest setup, but there's more complex interactions on these chips possible. But I think that's enough to give you a flavor of how Quacksalber plays. Okay, so that is Quacksalber, and I should just preface this by saying this game is published in Germany by Schmidt-Spiel. They tend not to do English translations of their games. Hopefully somebody will pick this up, because this is, to me, one of the more fun family games I've played recently. It has, you know, some familiarity, you know, or it feels somewhat familiar because it has similarities to games like, you know, Dominion, or, you know, some bag building games that we've seen like Orleans and whatnot. But this is really a unique beast of its own. It's definitely skews more towards a family game. It definitely has this stronger element of luck than those games, which I think will be a turnoff to some players. But it's also wrapped up in what I think is an extremely fun activity of, you know, this combination of press your luck plus, you know, how are you actually building out your bag of chips. So, you know, I could certainly see with some heavy gamers that being a turnoff, not wanting to, you know, go bust and then, you know, have their strategy go out the window, especially if you go bust in the last round because you've, you know, pressed your luck too far. That could be really devastating to your game. But for a family or, you know, a more casual group of gamers, this is really terrific. It's a super fun activity. Just that, you know, activity of, you know, pulling out chips and deciding every turn whether or not you're going to press on or not. Not only that, but a lot of the chip interactions also play up that, you know, feeling of, you know, oh, I really got a lucky pull. Since some of the chips, for example, if they only take effect if you pull them immediately after pulling a white chip, or you know, they only take effect if you've already pulled a number of orange chips that round, or they only take effect if you're beating your neighbor's number of chips of that color. Since those things are also in the mix, it's not just a matter of did I pull 8 white chips. No, there's a lot of press your luck elements, you know, competing at the same time. You might not be worried about busting, but you might, you know, still feel like you have bad luck because you haven't pulled the right chips in the right order. So this is an extremely lucky game. I don't think there's any way to get around that, but at the same time, it's an extremely fun game. And because there are 9 rounds, that luck factor of, you know, having a bad round really seems to be mitigated somewhat by that. And just, you know, just the generally fun activity of always having that decision of whether to keep going or not is really played up here to a great extent. So I believe I said this at the start of the video, but this has some definite German language components. Again, you'll need to either wait until there is a English language edition, or I did a translation of all the tiles, of all the cards. You could easily use that as a crib sheet and play the game pretty happily. I've played it with people. There aren't that many rules questions that pop up that require referring to the text once you start playing, because once you put out an array of the chip powers each game, those aren't going to change during the course of the game. The only thing you'll need to look up each round is essentially what the special power card is going to do each round. So, yeah, otherwise, I guess I would say that this is a terrific production. It's it's really nicely illustrated. The components are fine. The chips work well enough. They're just little cardboard chips, but they all feel the same in the bag, which is obviously the super important thing for a game where you're randomly pulling things out of the bag. I will say that to a certain degree, I've noticed that players who get lucky in this tend to keep getting lucky, and if you really get an early start, you can have substantially more points than the other players, and that rat tail mechanism is good because it does even that out somewhat, but the leader generally tends to stay in the lead in this. I've seen it play out differently, but at the same time, just the inherent activity of the game is so engaging that you tend to be competing with yourself to a large degree. It is, not a game that you could ever say that you won strictly because you were the better player, because there's such a high luck factor. And if you realize that going in, I think that this is a game that is so unique, so well realized, and has so many variations. The box has over 2,000 combinations of the potions possible, that it'll have tons of replay value with what's in the box. So it's a game that I would heartily recommend if you're willing to deal with the language issues. And if not, it's a game that I really, really hope does get a US publication, because it's a very unique, very compelling family game. So those are my thoughts on Quacksalber. I don't believe I said it's by Wolfgang Warsch, who's really on a roll this year. He is also the designer of The Mind and Illusion, Gaunt Clever, all terrific family games. This is just another in that selection of terrific family games by that designer. All of them still only available in Germany. Hopefully that changes soon. So those are my thoughts, and thank you for watching.